My name is Ryan Sokol. I'm an associate professor of mechanical engineering and as well as in the Institute for Systems Research. I'm also the interim director of the Maryland Robotics Center, which is part of the A. James Clark School of Engineering at the University of Maryland, College Park. In terms of, is there anything else that you wanted me
No,
to
you're
mention?
you're you're good. Do you mind if we jump straight into questions?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so somebody had emailed. They want to know what's the smallest thing that your lab has ever built, and what can it actually do inside the human body?
Oh, the smallest thing that we've ever built. Uh, Oh, that's a really tough one. We've made some really small structures that are, um, have features that are smaller than 1 micron. So for reference, basically, a thickness of a human hair, is roughly 100 microns, and a red blood cell is around 7.5 microns. And so we can build things that are certainly have structures that are under 1 micron. And so we've had some things like these little tiny springs that actually living cells can grab onto and pull them. We were trying to use them to understand how strong cells are, actually, like, almost like a Bowflex machine. Maybe that's too much of an old dig. But I think those are pretty much the smallest sizes that come to mind at the moment. But we have very thin, like micro lenses, for example, and we have very small microneedles that go into embryos that have very tiny features. All of this smaller than 10 microns.
That is wild. That is wild. That is so tiny. Um, so how close are we to having 3D printed organs or medical robots that kind of live inside us full time? Is that like a thing?
Okay, all right. So two major areas, right? So I think so if we're going to talk about, printing organs and stuff like that, that's a little bit controversial, actually. I mean, there's some people who believe that actually that will never be something that we can do, that in order to make kind of like to grow organs, that one would actually have to do it similar to how you do it in the body, when a baby is being, kind of a fetus is developing. And so there's a whole area of developmental biology that kind of works around this concept of stem cells and growing organoids that then grow into the potential organs that someone would want. There are others who think that 3D printing could be another route to kind of 3D printing either constructs that you can add cells to kind of build up the functionalities of certain organ systems. Or just straight bioprinting of putting down cells in certain places. And there could be hybrid approaches to that. For us, we're really a little bit more focused on trying to recreate what we see in order to have kind of reproducible testing systems. And so there's a lot of interest right now in what are referred to as non-animal models, which the idea is that instead of having to test drugs and other types of things on living animals, that maybe we could have these systems that can reproduce functionalities well enough that you can use them instead of having to do animal testing.
That's fascinating stuff. And I can't imagine like how you the trajectory of your career and the influence of like technology. We have a question from Patricia in Spain. Go ahead and unmute to ask.
Okay, my question is if you would recommend a career in robotics and why?
Yes, I mean, I would absolutely recommend a career in robotics. It is a really diverse field. It is everything from you have AI and machine learning on one side, and obviously that is blowing up at the moment in terms of what that could be. We have, kind of areas of medically helpful robotics. So there's a group here at University of Maryland that works on this triage robot that basically, if there's some type of, like, let's say there's an earthquake, that these robots can go out and they have the capacity to like ask. So one, they have sensors, they can detect, is someone breathing, what's their heart rate, all those kind of things. But then because of the advances in large language models like ChatGPT, they can actually ask people questions. How are you? Do you need help? And actually perform triage functions with that. Then there's like the realm of what my group focuses on, right, with what's referred to as soft robotics, which is instead of using electricity, we actually use fluid and we kind of inflate our robotics. And so we're working on soft robotic medical devices, which could offer kind of a new pathway to perform surgeries in a way that's far more minimally invasive. So there's kind of all of these different areas, but I don't feel that any of them are going away anytime soon. I think if anything, they're going to be increasing in terms of their usefulness and the potential applications that are enabled by them. And I think that they have a lot of applications that can really help humanity in many different ways. And so getting to be a part of that, could be a really fantastic thing.
That's so cool. And the future is now. And this kind of has to do with one of the questions that was emailed me. And they want to know what's something that used to be pure science fiction that you guys might be actually doing in your lab.
I mean, it's so much nowadays, was thought to be science fiction, not that long ago. I would say, even watching the interactions with that robot that I mentioned, where it's able to ask questions and offer comfort to someone who might be ailing, or other robotic systems that are able to perform surgeries that historically could only be performed by people who have gone through extensive training. And all of a sudden, these robots can process images and move in special dexterous ways. Yeah, it's hard to say kind of like what isn't, science fiction. We have another robot that is this drone robot that basically it's another situation where it was simulating an earthquake and it has to kind of fly into this room and map out the room for search and rescue personnel so that before they even enter the room, they have an idea of what's going to be there. But to give them a full 3D model of what it looks like before they even walk into the building, I mean, a couple decades ago, that was an impossibility.
Yeah, saving lives and changing the world. And speaking of which, when you have a student come in and they say, I want to go into robotics and change the world, but I don't know where to start, what kind of advice do you give to your students when that happens?
I mean, I think there's kind of two things that can be very helpful, in terms of that. So one is that people have certain talents, right? And so there happen to be certain areas that they thrive in, maybe from their studies, and seeing if there's something that kind of complements that. And then the second one, right, is that sometimes it's not so important that maybe you're the best at some particular skill set. Maybe it just happens that you're really interested. And so as a result, what other people qualify as work, it's something that you might find yourself doing just for fun. I mean, so for me, it was reading about biotechnology and reading about advanced manufacturing is how I got into 3D printing for robotics. And it wasn't necessarily that I was the best roboticist or I was the best manufacturer when I was younger. It was just that for fun, I found myself reading that. And so I was really trying to advance those fields and learn about those fields more so that it really wasn't a job. It was something that I wanted to do with my time and I loved being part of that world. So I think, hopefully all of those align that you end up being really good at something that also interests you. But those are really good starting places and trying to find if there's some roadmap that connects those.
That's great advice. Have you ever had a massive experiment or invention like just fail and you learned a lesson from it?
I'm trying to think of like biggest failures we've ever had. I mean, yeah, it's hard. The thing is, right? All right. So for example, we had a recent paper where basically we something that is not robotics, but we 3D nanoprint glass structures to make special needles for embryo microinjections and brain microinjections to deliver certain types of therapies directly into the brain. And one of my students was just, printing, and it was supposed to be an easy thing to print, and it kept failing. And we're like, well, what is happening? And so that led to a study, and we ended up kind of discovering that there was a size limit, that actually you're able to do things that are super small, but we couldn't do things that are like relatively bigger. And so it's something where what would have been a failure turned into kind of a really great journal paper that just came out. And so I think understanding that with experimental research and kind of anything that you want to do, you're going to hit roadblocks all the time. And so just knowing that that's just part of it, you're going to hit barriers and things are not going to work. And so knowing that persistence and kind of keeping at it and being creative in terms of how you kind of overcome that obstacle is something that to be a scientist, to be an engineer, that's just part of life, and it's a great part of life, and everyone goes through it. Even though you're only going to hear in the news, you're only going to hear about the successes, right? You're not going to get to see all the different things that were very frustrating and made us sad for a couple of days. But know that is just part of the life, and that's a good part of the research process.
Cool. Patricia, you had another question. Go ahead and ask.
Okay, I have read things about biorobotics, and my question is if there is something that mixes robotics and genetics.
Oh, robotics and genetics. So I will absolutely talk about this because it's an awesome area. It's referred to as biohybrid robotics. And there's some really cool work. So actually, a professor that I worked for in Japan, Shoji Takeuchi, at the University of Tokyo, he's done a lot of work. You might have seen some of it actually in the news. You didn't even realize it. So for example, like 3D printed steaks and cultured meat and stuff like that. But also actually using cells as the way to generate force for robots. So instead of using kind of traditional like linkages, actually growing cells and having them kind of move. There's another professor at Harvard who is Kit Parker. And so there's a really cool paper that came out about a decade ago where he actually had special cells that they cultured, and they designed them to respond to light, which is referred to as like optogenetics. And so what happens is he put them on something that looks like a stingray. And so based on like which side of it there's like light shining, it can basically like flap its wings based on all these cells kind of like contracting. The application for that actually was to design like new types of 3D print, or not 3D printed, but robotic hearts that could kind of like pulse. But as a demonstration, I think it was really very convincing and kind of really fun to see. So absolutely, if you're interested in that, I think biohybrid robotics is a really great place to be. And there are a ton of people that I would highly recommend looking into some of their work for sure. So there's Ritu Raman at MIT. There is Victoria Webster Wood at Carnegie Mellon. All really, really, really exciting stuff that's being done in those areas.
And this fascinating stuff. Is there like any morality when it comes to that? Because it's there to repair human quality of life. Is there any concern about it trying to enhance, like kind of like superhuman kind of stuff? Is there any discussion of that?
I mean, for those ones, people culture cells, pretty commonly, and so I think the examples like the stingray that can flap, right? It's not an actual stingray. It's just actually just like a piece of plastic, or it's an elastomer, and basically it's just cells on it that just happen to contract. So I wouldn't say that particular step has had any concerns from a moralistic standpoint. I do think, right, if we start talking about organ replacement and who has access to that, making sure that there's equity in terms of similar to organ or I guess organ donations right now, making sure that it's something that is done equitably. It's possible, right, that there can be concerns about certain upgrades to the human body. I think we've gotten to a stage where even prosthetics are so strong that there are certain runners who are able to outperform people with both legs, even though they don't have both legs, because actually they're using oxygen better because they don't need to use it for part, and they get like the springiness and so forth. So that's a whole kind of interesting area of, is enhancing the human body. Is that something that is there a moral guideline there? Is there ethical considerations? Is it access that we have to think about? Yeah, there's a lot to consider.
I'm sure there's like religious discussions in that when you talk about like the future of that, like where it's headed. Is there any of that kind of that goes in play as far as like faith and all that kind of stuff?
I mean, not that gets brought up, too often. I mean, it's possible, right? I mean, that it could be, but typically, I think most faiths have kind of a value system surrounding life, right? Murder is bad, because you're ending life. And even other aspects of things that would hurt people to diminish their life. And so the opposite being, repairing and helping, and extending life in theory, I think would be well aligned with most situations. I think sometimes the type of cell, right, historically, there were concerns about like embryonic stem cells and things like that. But with the discovery of induced pluripotent stem cells and other avenues, kind of some of those ethical issues kind of went away because it wasn't a problem anymore.
That's well put. I mean, thinking about that juxtaposition from one end of the spectrum to the other. With a final student question, this is coming again from Patricia. Go ahead and ask, friend.
Okay, my final question is if you could recommend a book for getting started in robotics.
Ooh, if I could recommend a book, oh golly. I mean, I would have to say something in the like Asimov universe of books. Oof. Yeah, no, I can't like narrow it down. I think I think kind of like all things science fiction are interesting, to me. There's a short story called Zima Blue that I like. I don't want to like spoil anything, but I think that there's some interesting parts there that tie into the world of robotics that kind of give people something to think about. And so that's all I'll say because I don't want to like ruin it. But it's a short story. It's a really easy read, especially for anyone who is kids of all ages, or not all ages, but definitely like middle school up. I think it's a solid read.
I totally get that, and we'll share that out and like have that in the graphic. So, is there anywhere you'd recommend for the kids to learn more about your work and your lab where they can visit online?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly, if you're interested at all in a little bit of this, there's a fun video on my YouTube page that has this 3D printed soft robotic hand that plays Super Mario Brothers. And so I think that can be just a little bit of an entry point in terms of, kind of wildly different applications and different ways to think about robotics that might just be a little bit different than kind of the types of robots we've grown up with in terms of, C3PO and things like that, or the Terminator, just this whole other avenue that's a little bit more like Baymax and Doc Ock from the more recent Into the Spider-Verse movies.
That's cool. Okay, so our final question, I asked this of all of our guests. Is there any advice that you could give to these kids, whether they want to go into robotics or something completely different? What kind of advice would you have for them as they go on to the next chapter of their lives and figure out what kind of paths they want to lead?
I mean, the biggest advice I would say is try to really, really, really think longer term. I think a lot of people sometimes, their careers are a little bit more defined by kind of short-term decision making. But if you can take a bit of time and do some soul searching and just really think about, in 10 and 20 and 30 years, what do you want your life to look like? And that can be beyond just your career and the type of work you do. It can be all aspects of your life. But if you have that kind of already in mind and that pictured, then you can start making choices and decisions today to put the pieces in place to make that type of reality for yourself happen. And so long-term thinking, I think, is the biggest recommendation I would give. Don't let yourself be reactive to the ebbs and flows of life. Try to be proactive with all aspects of your life if you can.
That's great advice. So thank you so much, Dr. Ryan, for taking the time to talk to us today, and we appreciate you so much. Students, go to edutainmentlearning.com for more guests and follow us on social media. We appreciate you greatly, and we wish you nothing but the best, sir.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.